Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are tuned in from across the globe. My name is Ian Mureu, the Digital Communications and Content Officer for World Animal Protection. At this point, as we wait for more attendees to join the webinar, I would like to apologize for the late or delayed start. And as we do that, as we wait for more to join, we will play a few videos, that is one on who we are and one around the impacts of climate change around the environment. So welcome all. Stay tuned. We have exciting presentation and an exciting presentation we are looking forward to. So stay tuned and let's have an engaging session. Thank you and welcome all.
At World Animal Protection, we know that every animal counts. We're a global animal welfare organisation and have been campaigning for over 50 years to end animal cruelty. We work to achieve global change. Every day, billions of animals are experiencing unbearable cruelty. We tackle the root causes of their suffering so that we can make the biggest difference to their lives. We give a voice to the voiceless. Our world is changing fast. As people face urgent issues like the climate emergency and depleting natural resources, we give animals a voice and ensure their needs are met because we all call our planet home. Right now, we're prioritising issues where change can transform the lives of the greatest number of animals, overhauling the global food system. And ending the cruel exploitation of our planet's wildlife. We know that the fate of animals' lives rests in our hands. Our passionate teams inspire and mobilise individuals and organisations to create change. We support local and global movements that are fighting for a better future for animals. Our knowledge and expertise give us a powerful voice at the most influential levels of government and business, where we establish animal welfare as a global priority and a local concern. Though the challenge is great, our determination is greater.
Wale wanyama nilikuwa nao sababu ya kukosa chakula walidhoofika. Ukitafuta mtu wa kununua, anunua ng'ombe mzima wa about 30,000, 40,000 anakupatia chini ya 10,000. Kwa hivyo unashindwa unafanya nini? Wengine walidhoofika wakashindwa na kutembea, wakafa, tukapatia mbwa. Jina langu ni James Kituku Kikuvi. Nimezaliwa hapa, niko na umri wa miaka 63. Hapa ni Mutulani Village, ambayo ni sehemu moja ya Makueni Sub-County and Makueni County. Kazi ninafanya kwa wakati huu, tambo nilikuwa ni mwalimu, nikaretire, niko hapa nyumbani. Chakula tunapata kutoka kwa shamba. Shambani ukikosekana chakula inategemea workshop ambayo siku hizi haina kazi. Sasa hao watu ndio nawapatia chakula kutokana na hizo.
Kwa sababu mama akiwa nyumbani ulikuwa nachukua kitu cha kuchimba, naenda nachimba viazi, nawekea watoto jiko kwa jiko, chimba mihogo nawekea watoto kwa jiko. Lakini wakati ukame ilikuja, ikawa shambani hakuna kitu, hakuna. Sasa kile kitu cha kuweka kwa jiko ni kutoa kwa soko. Sasa mama wakawa hapo wamegharamika sana. Maisha yameanza kuwa na gharama na vyakula inakuwa sasa huwezi kukula vile ulikuwa unatarajia kukula. Huwezi kulisha familia yako ile ulikuwa unatarajia kuwalisha kwa sababu tuna sokoni. Ninategemea kilimo cha mimea na pia kilimo cha ufugaji. Hiyo ndio shughuli ambazo tunashughulika nayo.
Sembe kitambo miaka kama 20 ambayo imepita, tulikuwa tunavuna vizuri sana. Vegetables tulikuwa tukipanda nyingi. Hata zilikuwa haziwezi isha. Tulikuwa hata tunalisha mbuzi nazo. Pia nilikuwa ninafunga mbuzi. Nilikuwa na mbuzi kama, kuna wakati nilikuwa na mbuzi kama 40 hivi. Na ng'ombe. Lakini vile iliendelea miaka ilipozidi, hizo nyasi hazipatikani, hasikui vizuri kwa sababu hakuna mvua ya kutosha. Imefika wakati kukauka, ikawa hata maji tunanunua maji ya kunywa, tunanunua maji ya ng'ombe. Tuseme for any domestic use tunanunua maji.
Sasa hii maji tuko na borehole iko karibu. Lakini zamani tulikuwa tunachota kwa kisima. Na hiyo kisima ilikuwa na maji nyingi, lakini vile wakati imeendelea na kupunguza. Hata saa nyingine inakauka kabisa. Si nyingi vile ilikuwa zamani. Kipunguza tunaenda kwa mto. Na sasa mito haina maji. Wakati ukame ulikuja mito imekauka, hata maji ile kwa mito ni kidogo sana. Na kuna wakati mwingine inakauka kabisa na kwa huwezi pata maji kwa mto.
Tulikuwa na mpango ya kujenga, hiyo mambo ya kujenga ikasimama. Sababu ile pesa unapata yote inaenda kwa chakula na mahitaji kama kununua nyasi ya ng'ombe. Unaona uangalie kuweka kile kiko hai kikae hai, lakini maendeleo inasimama. Unajua kuna vitu vingine zinakuja zina affect mvua. Tuseme kama population pressure imechangia. Watu wako wengi, ukitaka kujenga unakata miti na upandi miti. Zamani kulikuwa demand ya supply ya vitu vingine ambayo inatengenezwa kwa viwanda ilikuwa si kubwa sana. Kwa hivyo saa hii ukiona demand vile iko juu ya vitu kama sio zinatengenezwa kwa viwanda, nao pia viwanda zinaongezea. Na hiyo kuongezea sinaharibu ile carbon inatoka kwa viwanda, pia ikipanda juu inaharibu anga.
Kwa hivyo kile naweza kuambia waangalie, waweke mikakati ambayo mikakati inaweza kusaidia vitu ambazo zinatoa moshi. Viwanda zile ambazo zinatoa moshi zisizo zinaweza kutoa moshi ya kuharibu mazingira. Kuweka mikakati kuhusu huu ukulima wa ufugaji. Tusitumie sana chemicals katika ufugaji wetu, na pia vyakula ambazo tunapatia hawa wanyama wetu tutumie zile ambazo tunaweza kutoa kwa mashamba yetu. Tusitumie zile chemicals ambazo zinaweza kudhuru hata pia afya zetu.
If there are no measures taken to stop it, then tutakuwa tunaletewa chakula kutoka nje. Manake hatutakuwa able kujitafutia chakula ambayo inatutosheleza. Sababu bila maji, bila mvua, chakula hatuwezi tukalima. Kwa hivyo itakuwa itoke nje. Na kwa watu wale wazee kama mimi, itakuwa wanawawa na stress. Utaona familia ikianza kutawanyika, naye mzee anapanda damu, unaenda.
Once more, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are tuned in from across the globe. My name is Ian Moreu, the Digital Communications and Content Officer for World Animal Protection, and I will be your moderator for today. On behalf of World Animal Protection, I welcome you all to this COP28 webinar as we launch a report on how factory farming emissions are worsening the climate disaster. And thank you for taking your time. I promise that we will make it worth your time. Before we delve into today's topic, as most of you might know, this week marks COP28, which is a conference of parties, in other words, a convention organized by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this happens each and every year. It brings together different parties and governments to discuss and agree about climate action. And for that reason, we decided to have today's webinar. And without further ado, I would like to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Victor Yamo, our Humane and Sustainable Agriculture Campaigns Manager, joining us from Nairobi, Kenya, to take us through this report launch. And let's make it an interactive session. Karibu sana, Dr. Victor Yamo.
As Ian has said, we want to do a brief introduction on a report that we have put together, just looking at the impact of climate change, especially on the global south, with special emphasis on factory farming. Thank you. As I usually say, this is the most important slide that you're going to see today. It gives you contacts and which you can use to engage us. Today we'll talk about factory farming and climate disasters. And essentially, let me start by introducing World Animal Protection. Our vision is a world where animals live free from cruelty and suffering, and our mission is we move the world to protect animals. And as we normally say, the we in our mission is about all of us working together and driving the processes around protecting animals across the world and ensuring that animals live a good life wherever they are in, whichever setting they are in, whether farming, wildlife, or even animals in the other setups. As an office, we are located in Nairobi, Kenya, and we oversee the work for the organization across Africa. We work around a global strategy that was launched in 2021, but runs to 2030, entitled A New World for Animals. And essentially, around that global strategy, we have two goals. Goal one is to ensure farmed animals live good lives by transforming the global food system. And goal two is about stopping wild animals from being cruelly exploited as commodities by changing the systems that allow it. The two goals are interrelated because you realize, as we are going to explain in the presentation, that we farm animals in predominantly what used to be livestock, wildlife ecosystems. And in terms of farming animals, we are clearing large tracts of land to grow soy and meat and maize that go into production of farmed animals, and that then brings the relationship between the two goals. So what is factory farming? Because we are talking about a system of production that has negative impact, so it's best to understand what factory farming is now that we have finished who we are. Factory farming, as an introduction, we can say that the 6th IPCC assessment report calls for decarbonization in all sectors, including food systems, to mitigate against climate change. And essentially in food systems, we are then saying we need to look at factory farming that contributes between 11.2 to 19.6% of the global of the greenhouse gases and predominantly situated in global north, but is currently starting to move and entrench itself in the global south. The global north is predominantly the developed world, Europe, North America, and to some extent Japan and China at that level. And global south is predominantly the low to middle income countries, which is basically Africa, Asia, and to some extent Latin America. So essentially, when you use those two terms, that's what the geographical areas will be looking at. Factory farms are highly reliant on commodity feeding, including soy and maize, with animal feed production representing 45% of the total production. But essentially, factory farms are intensive livestock production systems that involve high throughput animal husbandry system with many animals of the same genetics confined in a unit under very controlled situations. The most farmed animals are essentially chickens and pigs, and we all appreciate that they are grown in large houses where we have massive numbers of them, and so the stocking density and the welfare standards become critical. Essentially, factory farms have been found to have poor animal welfare, and sentience of that animal is not recognized. Sentience simply means the capacity of the animal to relate to the environment in which it is. And these systems tend to have poor animal welfare standards. The goal for these systems is to minimize cost and maximize profit, to quickly produce large supplies of products. It can be eggs, as you're seeing on that picture. It can be broilers, meat or chicken meat. It can be milk. It can be pig meat. And essentially, what you're saying is that that system is not sustainable. It causes a lot of deforestation, as I explained earlier on, because we are clearing large tracts of land, to build houses to manage this for these farms, and also to grow the soy and maize that goes into this production system. And that is leading to a lot of biodiversity loss, and it's also leading to aspects of climate change, because by deforestation, you're freeing carbon into the air that leads to greenhouse gas processes. The system is not also sustainable because we are using a lot of antibiotics, and it's driving antibiotic resistance, and part of the big animal that you're looking at, the antimicrobial resistance. And so essentially a lot of antibiotics is used in this production system because of the poor welfare. The antibiotics are being used to mask the poor welfare, to promote growth so that the animals are able to grow a bit faster. But the reality is that then the product that comes to your table has antibiotic residues, but also has antibiotic resistant genes that are carried and shared among certain organisms, hence driving antimicrobial resistance. The system is also not sustainable because it's driving zoonotic diseases and pandemics. For those who follow closely international news, we are now looking and watching closely a swine flu or a swine influenza virus that is being said to be having the potential to become another pandemic. And that research has shown that whatever the research done by UNEP and ILRI looking at pandemics that have occurred between 1940 and when the COVID pandemic started clearly showed that 50% of our zoonotic diseases and pandemics are actually coming from production system. And that's why we have a keen interest at looking at factory farms. Last but not least, there's a lot of environmental contamination coming from this production system, partly because of the waste that it generates that needs to be managed. This waste can be carrying antibiotic residues, can be carrying antibiotic-resistant genes. If it is not disposed properly, then contaminates the environment and creates a bigger problem. So essentially, we are saying factory farms are not acceptable. Factory farms are things that we need to manage. But for today, then, let's see how it connects into the climate change. Currently, factory farming is driving meat production, and we say in 2018 about 80 billion animals were consumed globally. 69 billion of these were chickens and 1.5 billion were pigs. Almost 80% of these chicken and pigs were in intensive farming systems, and that then contributes to the factory farms that we are talking about. It is projected that by 2030, Meat consumption will grow by 30% in Africa, 18% in Asia and Pacific, and Latin America about 12%. And the biggest growth rate it will be in chickens, where we'll be seeing about 17.8% growth, followed by sheep, 15%, pigs about 13%, and cattle about 6%. So we're essentially saying from that short presentation up to that point that the impact of factory farms is at various levels. Being an animal welfare organization, the biggest impact for us is it causes suffering to billions of animals. And we've just indicated about 80 billion animals are consumed, and about 80% of them are in intensive or factory farming sort of systems. It has an effect on public health because of generating pandemics and zoonotics, and of course antimicrobial resistance at a certain level. It undermines biodiversity law. It leads to biodiversity loss and environmental pollution, as explained earlier on, because of the amount of waste that comes out of it, and forests that we clear so that we can grow animals or plants that are used to feed these animals. And essentially for today, it also drives climate change. That is what we then want to look at today. So the report, how factory farming emissions are worsening climate disasters in Global South, is what we are looking at. Essentially, it is a piece of research that has tried to attribute a proportion of climate-related weather disasters impacting on Global South to emissions produced by factory farming, predominantly farming that is sitting in Global North. So essentially, that's what we've tried to look at. The significance of the work is the ability to link impacts of factory farming to the economic impacts of disasters that are being seen in Global South. The findings of the report, which are quite interesting, is first that factory farming releases between 11.2 and 19.6% of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which is equivalent to about 6 trillion tons of emissions. This is what is worsening, leading to worsening droughts or floods. Currently in East Africa, we are experiencing quite some high level of rains that are leading to floods, but we have also been through a period of droughts. It also leads to worsening heat waves and wildfires across the globe. It is estimated that by 2050, the economic costs associated with climate-driven disasters globally will exceed $1 trillion annually, and factory farming will be liable to just over 10% of that cost, which is about a billion shillings. Currently, the Global North factory farms are responsible for about $8.6 billion worth of damage across recent climate disasters in Africa, Asia, and South America. Essentially, what we've done is look at climate disasters that have occurred in the last 5 years, and using some modeling systems to try and understand what contribution of that disaster loss is actually attributable to factory farms that are predominantly in the Global North. It is part of the finding is that factory farming is expected to increase in the Global South, being driven by the increase in demand of meat, as we've seen 30% in Africa by 2030. And that is driving the intensification of our production system because of the belief that intensification will sort our food security, will contribute to our food security. In fact, the reality from organizations like Food and Agriculture Organization shows that the contrary is going to happen. That increase in factory farming in Global South will not only increase factory farming emissions, but will worsen climate-related disasters in the Global South. It is also seen and has also been shown that it is replacing the sustainable agroecological and diversified independent farming systems of the Global South, hence threatening the livelihoods and food security of close to 1.7 billion people that are living in Africa. It is estimated from the research that Africa countries will spend about 53 billion US dollars annually by 2030 to adapt to the climate crisis that is being seen. Before I go to recommendations, I would want to take a pause for us to then play a video that then highlights some of the things that the research has seen and something that we've put together as an organization to just pictorially or visually give you an indication of what we are actually dealing with. So we'll take a break and head to the video before we come back for the recommendations from the report.
Across our fragile planet, farmers work the land to put food on our tables. In the global south, independent smallholder farmers provide affordable food for their communities, harvesting food from high-welfare animals and sustainable crops. Up to 80% of food in sub-Saharan Africa is produced in this way. Elsewhere, industrial factory farms dominate. Caged animals live in unimaginably cruel conditions and are dosed with drugs to stave off diseases, ensuring the mass production never ends and profits flow. Swaths of wild habitat are destroyed to plant crops for animal feed, and the journey from factory farm to plate pumps more than 6 trillion tons of emissions into the atmosphere annually. From India and Pakistan to Mongolia and the Amazon and across Africa, food security and social stability are threatened by droughts, floods, wildfires, extreme temperatures, crop failure, and death of livestock. And things are getting worse. Factory farming accounts for 11% of global greenhouse emissions, and by 2050 will cause over $100 billion a year in damage. The devastating effect of factory farms, especially in developing countries, has been difficult to gauge until now. Groundbreaking research by World Animal Protection shows how the livelihoods of smallholder farmers and the communities they serve are being decimated by industrial processes in far-off countries. Instead of expanding industrial farming methods, we can learn from farmers like John Kamathi and his wife Belize. The developed global north needs to farm responsibly. We must transition to humane and sustainable food production, eat less meat and more plant-based foods. We must end factory farming, because there is a cleaner, fairer, cruelty-free way to feed the world.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that gives you an indication of what we are dealing with as globally, and that is why this week into next week we are having the COP28 happening in Dubai for leaders, the global leaders, to discuss and see what needs to be done to ensure that factory farming or greenhouse gases that are causing climate change is dealt with. And it's a discussion that has gone over a period of time, considering this is COP28 and we've had one every year. And essentially we are saying as an organization, it is time to act, and we are requesting our leadership globally to take time and appreciate the devastating effects of climate change, especially the contribution of agriculture and intensification of livestock production system into the debates. And so now I'll just deal with the recommendations from the report. We'll then conclude and have an interactive session where we can have questions and answers. So in terms of recommendations, the first recommendation is we are urging the global community to stop supporting factory farming and continued industrialization of livestock production systems. This is essentially due to the significant contribution of greenhouse gases and global heating that is coming from factory farming. As indicated in the clip and also earlier on in the presentation, factory farming is contributing between 11.2 and 19.6% of greenhouse gases, and that is significant. We are then essentially saying as an organization that we will not be able to sort out our climate issues until agriculture and especially contribution from livestock production system is factored into that narrative. The second thing is we are asking people to support and governments to support a global moratorium on any new factory farms. Essentially, we are saying in the global south, we should stop factory farms from displacing agroecological and pastoral livestock production systems that support these communities. The clip has clearly indicated that 80% of the food that we eat, especially in the low to medium income countries is driven or is produced by the smallholder production systems. And if we continue replacing them with livestock, with factory farmings, then we'll have challenges with not only our food security issues, but also with continued climate change issues because of the increased greenhouse gases that will be coming from this production system. We're also requesting national governments to establish national plans that support a just transition away from industrialized livestock production systems towards humane, sustainable, and agroecological production systems that are sensitive to the environment and sensitive to the production, to the needs of the animal, because it's humane and sustainable. We are also saying that we need to ensure that food systems and agriculture are central to climate action efforts at COP28. Even as COP28 is ongoing, we are saying that it is important that we include that discussion of food systems and agriculture into the debate that is going on, or into the discussions that are and negotiations that are ongoing. We know there have been attempts. For instance, the Nairobi Declaration that was done during the Africa Climate Week or Climate Summit clearly had indicated that certain governments are beginning to accept that there is contribution that is coming from agriculture that needs to be looked at. And that is the effort that we want to continue asking our leadership, especially those that are negotiating from the African continent, to continue ensuring that that is carried through, and give priority to dealing with factory farming emissions within the national, the climate action plans that we are looking at, or the national designated plans. We're also saying this need to establish the loss and damage fund with sufficient resources as committed to at COP28 that was held in Egypt last year. Essentially, we are saying that consistently there's been a lot of talk, there's been a lot of commitments, there's been a lot of pledges, but these are not being turned into actual tangible funding or resources that can be used to mitigate against climate change. We are saying that as we do the loss and damage fund, we adhere to the polluter pays principle, where the people that are giving the greatest pollution need to pay the greatest to sort out the damage that they've caused to this extent. And last but not least, we are saying governments should end subsidies that support factory farming, especially in global north, where big producers tend to get at certain levels subsidies that then make their products cheaper and more competitive, because that then is driving the process of expansion of factory farming. We are saying these subsidies should be used to support humane and sustainable agroecological production systems that then mitigate against climate change and ensures that we have a better environment in terms of production that is sensitive to animals and is humane, but is also sustainable and ensures that our resources are utilized in a way that the future generations will have an opportunity to utilize the same resources. So in a nutshell, that is what we are saying as World Animal Protection. In short, that's what the report is all about. The report is available. We can send it to you on a link for you to then engage us, read it, and engage us on the findings and how then we can work together. Thank you very much. So I think we'll go back to Ian, who will then lead the interactive session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Victor Yamo, for the very insightful presentation. I hope we've all got to grasp something. I had instructed for those who had questions and comments to type them in the comment section or the question and answer section. At this point, I will allow time for more of that. For those with questions, for those with comments, you can type them out and we will endeavor to respond to all of them. So Dr. Yamo is sticking around. And just as a pointer, a very important note for the journalists and media on the call, we will have a 5-minute session, a one-on-one dedicated session with Dr. Victor Yamo. That is after the presentation. So you can hang around if you will have any questions that you do not want to ask at this point, or any dedicated customized comments you may require from our speaker for today. Remember to join our movement for people working together to create a better life or a better world for animals. Remember to follow us on our social media platforms, that is Wild Animal Protection Africa on Instagram, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. We're using the hashtag End Factory Farming today. So remember to keep the conversations going, tag us, and mention us wherever you put in insightful posts or content about the topic of today. I will leave the floor open for questions as we keep on typing in the questions, the comments for the questions. We could start with one, Dr. Yamo, just as a comment that came in from Bernard Miner. He commented that with increased human population, it might not be easy to stop large-scale factory farming. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question from Maina, and that is something that we appreciate as an organization. But what we are saying is that we need to strike a balance between the so-called large-scale production systems and the small-scale and smallholder that provides, especially in the African context, where 80% of our production is driven by small-scale farmers. As we try to replace them, the reality is that, and I think the clip showed it very well, you are losing out because you are ending up in a situation where the farmer is losing out on his animals. He's also losing out on his crops because the water is in a drought situation. The water is not available for him to continue farming. And so essentially that's why as an organization, we are saying we need to strike a balance. That's the first one. The second one is we are saying we need to then drive production systems to be able to look at certain standards. And globally, there are things that are known as farm animal responsible minimum standards that then tries to address and mitigate around certain things. It looks at the humane aspects of the production system, if it's an animal production system, to ensure that the animals are not only being used as commodities, but they are being given opportunity to live a relatively good life. It also ensures that certain aspects of the production system are catered for. Remember that animals, the welfare of animals is looked at around 5 fundamental freedoms. Freedom from hunger and thirst to ensure that the animal is fed properly, but also given good, clean water. The second aspect is freedom from discomfort to ensure that the animal is in a comfortable environment, well ventilated, good beddings, enough space, because these things are what then drives the challenges that we have with factory farming. Where there's too many animals in a small space, you end up with disease spread. When there are too many animals in a small space with poor ventilation, you end up with pandemics, because that's what then leads to mutations and shifts in that process, in antigenic shifts at certain levels. So essentially, we are saying for production system, we then need to ensure that we are getting our products from a higher welfare production system, and that is something that is critical. The last bit is then to say, do we really need to consume that much meat? And I think in the clip the clip talks about eating less meat. We are not saying as an organization that to stop eating meat is rationalizing the amount of meat we eat, because there are alternative proteins. There are alternative plant-based proteins that are as nutritious and as important as what we need. Essentially, what has happened from our research in other bits and pieces of work that we've done in Africa, especially in urban centers in Africa, and urbanization is something that we need to look at. The urbanites are eating relatively higher quantities of meat than is really necessary, and that is also leading to other public health considerations. Things like non-communicable diseases because of high blood pressure, respiratory issues, chronic cardiac diseases, etc. So we need to strike a balance so that we are not just eating too much meat that is causing problems, not only to the animal, but to our human health, but we are also then having opportunities to have alternative meat that might be more sustainable and more efficient, because we are even seeing from production systems that giving grain to animals, then eating the animal is a very inefficient system. If you look at calories or energy that system generates, 30%, if you put in 100 kilocalories, you only get 30% of that at the end of the day. So part of the question is, should we be feeding animals on grain than eating animals, or should we be eating grain or things like soya directly? So that is the discussion, and that's the balance that we're asking for as an organization. And I hope that will also help us to address the high population that we are talking about. Thank you, and back to you, Ian.
Thank you for that detailed response, Dr. Yamo. I will move on to the next question. And just before I do that, I would like to recognize every region of the world that is represented in this webinar. We do have representation from West Africa. We do have several countries in East Africa represented, that is Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya. We do have Nigeria, we do have Ghana, and we do have a representation from Zambia. So thank you all for joining. And as we move on with the question and answer section, a question from Gerald for Dr. Victor Yamo. He's asking what measures can be taken to end factory farming in rural areas. I think you have touched a bit on that, but if you do have any additional comments, Dr. Victor Yamo, please feel free to take that. We do have another one from Boniface Ongeri. There are individual entities involved in industrial farming. How can we help them seek sustainable alternatives that can better their income? That is one from Boniface. He also goes on to another one that asks, what is the role of developed units in coming up with measures to end factory farming in the country? I am assuming that's Kenya. We do have another question from Mark Solomon, that's from Nigeria. He wants to know examples of humane and agroecological animal farming systems. And secondly, how best can we shift away from factory farming? I think we can first take that, Dr. Yamo, then I will come in with a few more that have been typed in.
I think for Gerald, what I would want to say is that in the recommendations that we put at the end of the report, there are 6 recommendations which talk about the measures that we need to take to end factory farming. One, as we have indicated there, is to stop subsidizing them, especially in the developed or the global north, where there's some level of subsidies that then makes the farmer not incur the full cost of that production system. I think it's something that is critical, and we are saying that we need to stop that subsidy so that whatever we are using as subsidy goes into the agroecological, humane and sustainable production system that we are suggesting. The other thing is then we also need to manage and mitigate against the outcomes, the negative outcomes, especially the climate crisis that you're talking about. And towards that, we are saying we need to ensure that factory farming is part and parcel of the discussion around COP28 and the other COPs that will have the subsequent COPs, and then ensure that factory farming a moratorium is put so that we stop the expansion of factory farms, especially into Africa and Asia, where it is replacing small-scale farmers. And that is something that governments need to look at critically. What kind of farming systems are we looking at? Because, of course, we also accept the reality that factory farming is already there. It's also about ensuring and trying to drive that factory farm to become more humane and more sustainable. And that's why I talked about the incorporation of farm standards in our production system. Farms simply mean farm animal responsible minimum standards, and there's a whole array of things that it looks at. It looks at the stocking density, the number of animals, ventilation, the environment, the workers that work in that, how sensitive are they to the animal, disease control, all those things that are critical and important. So it's a discussion, and I think for us as an organization, we want to stimulate a discussion so that people first recognize that there is factory farming, and that factory farming, which was thought to be a panacea or a solution to our food security issues, is actually working negatively against us, not only in terms of food security, but it's contributing to climate change, it's contributing to public health issues. It's contributing to biodiversity loss, deforestation, and all those things that are critical and important. And that's part of what we then need to look at. In terms of Boniface, how to seek sustainable alternatives, I think there are things that we need to be looking at. One of it, which is a recommendation in the report today, is to look at a just transition. And a just transition simply says, is it really necessary that we must eat that much meat? If not, what are the alternatives? At this point in time, we talk about alternative proteins, and Africa is rich. If you look at African diets or diets from the low to middle income countries, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, we have rich diets that are plant-based, which are as nutritious as the meats that we are talking about. And again, I want to emphasize, we are not saying you don't eat meat, you're just saying eat it with moderation, because excessive meat consumption is also driving another public health problem around non-communicable diseases, giving us high blood pressure, heart attacks, and all those things, the cancers that we are talking about. So that's something that we need to be looking at. Alternatives are also there. I think if you look at research done from agricultural institutions or research being done by academic institutions, there's a ton of data around alternative proteins, around meat that is synthesized. All these things are things that we need to start looking at, especially as our population keeps growing, with the possibilities that by 2050 we'll have literally doubled the population of people in Africa who will still need to be fed, against a background where we're having less spaces to grow animals. In a country like ours, we can even see what is happening in terms of land use. We are ending up with agricultural land being converted into housing. And that is something that we need to start asking ourselves. The second part of the question, the role of devolved units on managing factory farming, I think it's both devolved and national government. The devolved units need to start, asking themselves, what do we need to do to protect our production systems, especially our agroecological production systems and the small-scale farmers? How do you work with small-scale farmers to give them the right information? Because I think part of the challenge the small-scale farmer is having is not having the right information. Our extension service is not there. It's something that we need to say, can we ensure that we have enough extension service people who then drive this process, who can give the farmer information around how to feed the animal, how to ensure that the animal is in a comfortable environment so that it's not having negative outcomes, how to ensure that the farmer applies the 5 fundamental freedoms that we talk about, and how it looks like from a farming perspective, and how to ensure that the farmer adheres to certain minimum standards, because the product that comes out of that production system ultimately must be wholesome. It must not have any antibiotic or pesticide residues. It must not have any organisms that might negatively impact on the consumer. And it must be a product that meets is nutritious enough for the consumer. And that then needs, for counties, especially in the Kenyan context, where counties, agriculture and animal production and veterinary services are devolved functions. So these are functions that must be driven by the county governments, by ensuring the technical people are there, the farmers are getting the necessary support and input that they need and to produce at a very optimal level. Then I go to Mark's question, examples of agroecological production systems. They are there. What I'd suggest is we could easily provide that to you, because I know that there are production systems in the Kenyan context. For instance, there are people who are producing, quote unquote, at the level that you're talking about, because they are able to manage certain processes. The big producers that we've also worked with, who are now making certain commitments around animal production systems, ensuring that their production systems are sensitive to animal welfare standards. They are adopting the farm standards and are actually leading the process. In East Africa, there's one which has done extremely well that we can give as an example. It's only that I do not want to be seen to be marketing for a certain corporate. But those are realities. And as an organization, we are continuously engaging producers, retailers, restaurants to ensure that they meet certain standards. Because if consumers can drive that process, we'll end up with production systems that are humane and sustainable and are heading towards what we are saying as an organization, a sustainable system. But alongside that, there are traditional pastoral and agroecological systems that have worked and continue to work, which are even in the country like ours, taking root in the arid and semi-arid areas. And these are things that governments need to encourage to ensure that we are not losing out and en masse going into factory farming, but we're also able to sustain our traditional production systems that have been with us and have really worked for us up to now. We're still saying 80% of that of our production is coming from that system, and is something that needs to be looked at and supported. Thank you, and back to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yamo. Let's take a few more. And the first one is from Kevin Lonzalo, who says, thank you so much for the wonderful report. The impacts of factory farming seem to be cutting across or touching several sectors. I am wondering if World Animal Protection is targeting stakeholders beyond the climate space. That is from Kevin Gonzalo. We do have a question from Maina Ngodo. Human population is rising. The tragedy is that struggling farmers want to go factory farming, the factory farming way once they cross the poverty barrier. How do you advise students graduating in these professions, that is vets and also veterinary practitioners? How would you advise them? We do have a question from Monica. Factory farming is a source of job opportunities to many people, especially the youth. So if it will be an end, to many people and will lack jobs. What can be done to help those who will not have jobs? That's from Monica. We do have a question from an anonymous attendee. Is the issue of antimicrobial resistance due to the use of antibiotics in animals confirmed as an issue or just thought to be one? Is the issue of antimicrobial resistance due to the use of antibiotics in animals a confirmed issue or just thought to be one? We do have another question from Boniface Ongeri. Is factory farming related to lifestyle diseases in any way? Let's take that bunch, Dr. Yamo, then we can get a few more. We do have a long list of questions coming up.
Okay, good questions. I think, again, quite some work. Let's see how we get across them. Now, starting with Kelvin, who says it cuts across factory farming and climate change cuts across sectors. We're targeting stakeholders in the climate space. I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. We are here today launching a report that is talking about climate disasters. Part of our team is in COP28 in Dubai, engaging the stakeholders on the ground. So essentially, the answer to that question is yes, we are. If you remember, I don't know whether you followed us for a while, we actually drove a process of engaging stakeholders on the continent early in the year when we did the Africa Protein Summit. The recommendations that came from the Africa Protein Summit were actually taken to the Africa Climate Secretariat, which is situated at the State House, because it's part of the President of the Republic of Kenya. Dr. Ruto is the current chair of the Africa Group of negotiators around climate-related matters. So we have been engaged at all levels, at the continental level, not only in Africa. We have been in all the climate weeks across the globe. We continue to engage not only with the climate people, the players in the climate space, but people who are affected. That's why we are talking to consumers and media and the general public at this level, because we are saying it's something that it's not only about a discussion with a small group of people in one corner who are the experts in the matter, but it affects all of us, and all of us need to understand it need to understand where it's coming from, and then make our contribution towards ensuring that we lessen the impact of climate change globally, whether it's by contribution on how we do our farming system, what we consume, by addressing deforestation, addressing carbon, the carbon discussion. Those things are all important and critical, but I think the first and important thing is for all of us to understand what we are dealing with, what are the opportunities to engage, and then pick it from there. I hope that answers you. For my friend Maina, I think the advisory, advice is not only to students, it's to academia. The way we taught veterinary medicine or animal production when Maina and myself were in the university, things have changed. The issues we are dealing with, the emerging diseases, the climate issues, the NCDs, the non-communicable diseases that we are seeing are because of shifts that we need to then address. And so we cannot continue to teach and practice veterinary medicine or animal production or human medicine for that matter, or environmental health for that matter, in the same good old system that we use. So my encouragement to not only students but also academia is we need to keep up abreast with what's happening. We need to be in the spaces where we are discussing climate change. We need to be able, and I like what I saw yesterday in the newspapers coming from COP28, where there's a discussion around the contribution of climate change to human health. Those are the things we need to be looking at. What is the contribution of climate change to animal production, to food, to nutrition? Yeah, it's not about diseases. It's about looking at it holistically and saying these are the issues that we're dealing with and grappling with, and these are the issues that the next generation of students, the current students who are the next generation of technical people and leadership in these areas need to be alive to and aware of. So I'd just say let's engage with the process at wherever level we can. It's good if we have students who are listening to us today. Let them pick one or two things and then see how they can be part and parcel of that, because they are the people who are going to be out there talking to farmers and carrying the message. They need to have the right information, and they need to consistently update. That's why I think for all professionals, continuous professional development becomes critical. To Monica, I think when we talk about jobs, we need to ask ourselves, is factory farming generating more jobs, or it's actually taking away the little jobs that we have? Because we say, and data shows that 80% of our production is coming from smallholder producers. If you put in a big factory farm in an area, you literally replace a big chunk of those small-scale farmers and leave them destitute. So essentially, I think I'd like to say, unlike your thought process that factory farms create jobs, I think it's the converse that we're dealing with. Factory farms are taking away jobs from the smallholder producers that have been using these smallholder production systems for their sustenance and delivering. In fact, the estimate is that by that shift, we are threatening livelihoods and food systems for about 1.7 billion people across the planet. So imagine that shift, and I think it's something that we also need to discuss. In terms of questions asked by Anonymous, is AMRs in animals confirmed? Is it an issue? I think the best answer to that would be, if it's not an issue, why is the country and countries in Africa and globally talking about it? Why are we creating national action plans and national antimicrobial resistant containment and prevention policies that is working in a One Health context, that is saying the only way you address antimicrobial resistance at human health is to look at what's happening at the environment, to look at what's happening in production systems, and then come together and say, if this is happening in production system, it is then contaminating the environment, which then is ending up in human health. That then becomes an issue. So the reality is that, I think this is an academic debate. The reality is that AMR is an issue across all sectors, and that's why even a week or two back during the World AMR Awareness Week, when we launched the new National Action Plan for Kenya, the launch was done with all the sectors represented, we had high-level presentation from Ministry of Health. We had high-level presentation from Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. We had high-level presentation from Ministry of Mining and Blue Economy because of fisheries. We had high-level presentation from Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So essentially, the world has recognized that there's contribution coming from the animal health aspect and human and environmental aspects that are significant and needs to be addressed. And that's why the the National Action Plan for Containment and Prevention of Antimicrobial Resistance is a One Health issue and is being driven from that One Health level. Both at national level, if you look at the NASIC Constitution, and at the county level, if you look at the CASIC Constitution. I think that addresses that process. Last but not least, Boniface, is factory farming related to lifestyle? I think we said that when we started, and we said factory farming is contributing to public health. How is it contributing to public health? It's contributing to public health because we are changing our dietary lifestyle. We are not eating the same foods that we used to eat. In fact, data from what we have been able to garner as World Animal Protection in Knowledge, Attitude and Practices surveys clearly shows that when you leave university and you get a good job, you stop eating the bogus or the vegetables that you used to eat and you start eating high levels of meat. And that's part of the problem that is leading to non-communicable diseases that is on the increase in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa specifically for that matter. And so we are saying there's a link. What is the link? It's the way global food systems are now driven. Yeah, global food systems is looking at all the way from production to consumption and management of waste. In that system, you find there's a lot of advertising, a lot of social media engagement on digital platforms that then drive consumption of meats. Yeah, and that's why you see in places like Africa, there's an influx of big brands, big restaurant brands, big supermarket brands that are driving consumption of meat. That in itself is a behavior or a change in our dietary processes. And that is part of the changes in lifestyle. You look at what has happened in the last 5 or so years. We've moved from supermarkets that used to sell products to supermarkets that have butcheries to supermarkets that are now having eateries. You can literally buy a complete meal. You don't need to cook it from home. That lifestyle change has even gone further to where you don't even need to cook anything at your place. You call and it's delivered. So these are all the things that factory farming is driving. And all these things are things that then are contributing to some of these things that we need to look at. And that's why for as an organization in 2021, we then made the decision that we are not just going to work around animals in farms, but we are going to look at the global food systems that then encompasses all these things. Thank you, and back to you, Ian.
Thank you, Dr. Yamo. A few more questions. We do have another one from Kevin Lunzalu. A question on the incorporation of loss and damage fund, which is one of the recommendations given by the report. And his assumption is that polluter pay methodology may give the factory farmers an avenue of continuing to do demand as long as they can pay up. Is this correct? He says that the incorporation of loss and damage fund, which is one of the recommendations given by our report, and the assumption is that polluter pay methodology may give the factory farms an avenue of continuing to do damage as long as they can pay up. Is that correct? We do have another question from Viola, asking, do you think the government will support this initiative since they are used to? I am assuming this has happened. So do we think the government will support the initiative? I do have a question from Alexander. Alexander is joining us from Liberia and is asking, what can animal rights and vegan organizations do to engage stakeholders to abolish factory farming? He goes ahead to ask, what can, okay, it's the same question. What can animal rights and vegan organizations do to engage relevant stakeholders to abolish factory farming in Liberia? We do have one from Duncan. In as much as agriculture is a developed function, in the reality is a bigger percentage is that the reality is that a bigger percentage is still under the national government, thus less funding to continue. Thus funding to continue. So how can counties go about this? How can counties go about this to be at the forefront? Okay. As much as agriculture is a devolved function, the reality is the bigger percentage is still under the national government, thus funding to counties. How can counties go about this to be at the forefront? I think we can take those few questions as we wait to see if we'll have any more. Back to you, Dr. Yamo.
Thanks, Ian. Good questions again. For Kevin, the incorporation of loss and damage fund and the polluter pays is, I hear where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from. But I think let's not look at the recommendations in isolation. Those recommendations, the 6 of them are supposed to work together. So in terms of saying that loss and damage fund, which is something that the President of the Republic of Kenya has driven, and that's why we had an African climate summit, which was essentially to look at investments that go into the climate debate, carbon rights and all those things. Essentially what you're saying is you need the biggest polluter needs to pay the highest. It's not about setting a basic minimum and saying, like in some laws where we say, if you're found doing this, then this is the fee. No, it is proportional. If you are the biggest contributor to the problem, you then need to give the biggest contribution to solve that problem. And that's what the polluter pay is all about. Alongside that, remember that beyond that, we're also saying there need to be reduction in subsidies. So if the polluter has also been getting subsidies from governments, that is why he's able to make some of these payments and decisions, then that subsidy is also supposed not to be there. That way then the polluter meets the full costs of his business. He's not getting subsidized to do a business that is negatively impacting the globe, but he's also paying for the mistakes or his contribution into the problem. I think if you do it that way, then you will find that a lot of these big producers will not have the capacity to continue polluting, and they will look for alternative ways of managing that process. Viola asks, do you think the government will support the initiative? Earlier on, Viola talked about the fact that some of our asks when we did the Africa Protein Summit early in the year, and then had a communique that we then took to the government, to the seat of power at State House, where we met the Climate Change Secretariat. Some of the asks that we are talking about, things around ensuring that smallholder farmers are taken into, are part of what was agreed on in the Nairobi Declaration. So government is already on board in some of these things. So it's a question of us consistently engaging them and ensuring that we work with them, because governments, you and I need to work with our government to get to certain levels. I have been part and parcel of engagement with the African group of negotiators and other countries that are leading in this process. And essentially where governments have taken it seriously and recognized the connection, then they are willing to put certain funding into that process. Hopefully that in COP28, those commitments that were made in COP27 can be turned around into tangible funds that can be used to even help governments to start putting that process. But remember that governments are also required from the COP process to do the national determined contributions, the NDCs, or the National Action Climate Plans. That's part of the government engagement. I will give you, for instance, in the Kenyan context, our plan was done in 2017. So it's something that we already are and governments are engaged in doing. It's just that we are now saying it's not just about fossil fuels, it's also about agriculture and food production that needs to be looked at. And it's something that is taking root. Alexander, what can animal and vegan organizations do to limit factory farms? I think, again, the answer is pretty straightforward. First is to sensitize the general population to understand what the issues are. And that can be done by anybody, any organization. I think it's just saying this is the problem and this is the magnitude of the problem, doing some home-based research so that as we engage in the continent, we are not talking about data coming from elsewhere. We're saying we have done research in this country, in Liberia, and this is the situation, and this is why as vegan organizations or animal welfare organizations, we are taking the stand that we are taking unapologetically. And so it's something that you then need to start saying, what is the issue in Liberia? How is it impacting? Where is the data? Is it something that we need to address? Once we start addressing it, how do we collaborate with other stakeholders in that area, both locally, regional, or around the continent or global ones? How do you work together to ensure that the general public, the government, the key stakeholders in this matter understand and appreciate what the issues are? Last but not least, Duncan, I think I'm not the right person to talk about the devolved function and who has what money in this country. I have my own opinion around it, but today let me stick to my day job. The reality is that counties have responsibilities that are given to them by the Constitution, Schedule 4 in this country. Part of that responsibility for the devolved function is to ensure animal husbandry, animal production, disease control is all in the hands of the county. If counties, and we know and appreciate the fact that counties are also getting a substantial amount of money, what are they budgeting to do with that money? Let's start small. If a county has X billion shillings in their budget, what is the contribution going to agriculture? Historically, we have the Malabo Declaration and all these declarations which say agriculture should get 10% of your budget. A county is giving 10% of the budget into agriculture. If they are not, then they are part of the problem, irrespective of how much money they are getting. If they are not, or if we are not driving them to employ the right people, because I know counties where a certain cadre of manpower that drives production systems is not there. If they're not engaging these people and employing them to work with the farmers, and you remember we say we are an agricultural country, then counties are failing irrespective of where the budget sits. Yeah? And I think that is something that we need to address as the general public or the populace, the voters that vote these people into these spaces. What does the county integrated development plan say about some of these things? In some of these counties, if you go and look at the CIDP, the County Integrated Development Plan, there's no mention of some of these issues that we are dealing with, the realities that we need to be tackling. And part of the failure is you and I, the public or the constituents or the people who belong to these counties. We are not being part of this process. When they're doing budgets, are we in the budgeting process? Because budgets are supposed to be we have some level of public participation where you and I go and say, in our county, we have a shortage of this cadre of people who would want to do farming. We are lacking in this. Then the county budgets for it. If you are not part of that process, irrespective of how much money county governments say they should get, or how much money they get from national government, a good chunk of that money will go to waste. So essentially we are saying, let's forget about who's getting what. There are mechanisms within the budgetary process and mechanisms within the Constitution and in the policy arena that addresses the sharing of resources, that addresses what goes to counties and what goes to national government. If there's a discrepancy at that level, counties have mechanisms to have that addressed through Senate and through the various engagements that they have. To me, what is important is what do we do with the little money that we get? Is it serving and addressing the issues that you are seeing, the food issues that you're talking about, the non-communicable diseases, the AMR we are talking about, the climate issues that we are talking about? If not, then counties are failing unapologetically. Thank you, and back to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Dr. Victor Yamo. At this point, I do not see any new questions coming up. Thank you for the great responses. I think it has been quite an informative session. And if anyone does have any questions, we are available. We are here. Our contacts are on our website. I did share a link of that earlier. Just as a point to note, for those who are interested in the report, there is a link to the report in the chat box. So if you do need the report, head in there and you can get access to it. For the journalists who are on the call, please do let us know, those who want to be left behind for a few questions with our speaker for today, that is Dr. Yamo. Do type that in the chat box that you're interested. But at this point, I would like to thank you all for attending this session, for participating and taking your time to be with us. We will share the presentation and other assets, that is including the videos that have been shared throughout this. Let's keep the conversation going on our social media platforms. Do remember to tag us and do remember to use the hashtag #EndFactoryFarming. For the journalists, we will also have a press release after this, and we will be displaying the contact details for the person who you can get in touch with for a one-on-one session, a much personalized one with our speaker for today. For most of you, I know you do know Evans Kipkori, our media and our communications and multimedia officer. So at this point, for those who want to jump off this call, thank you very much for attending. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. I have been your moderator for today. My name is Ian Moreo. Thank you. God bless and have a good time. In the meantime, as we wait for the journalists who are interested in a one-on-one session, we will play a video of who we are, showcasing what we do as an organization. Thank you very much.
At World Animal Protection, we know that every animal counts. We're a global animal welfare organisation and have been campaigning for over 50 years to end animal cruelty. We work to achieve global change. Every day, billions of animals are experiencing unbearable cruelty. We tackle the root causes of their suffering so that we can make the biggest difference to their lives. We give a voice to the voiceless. Our world is changing fast. As people face urgent issues like the climate emergency and depleting natural resources, we give animals a voice and ensure their needs are met because we all call our planet home. Right now, we're prioritising issues where change can transform the lives of the greatest number of animals, overhauling the global food system. And ending the cruel exploitation of our planet's wildlife. We know that the fate of animals' lives rests in our hands. Our passionate teams inspire and mobilise individuals and organisations to create change. We support local and global movements that are fighting for a better future for animals. Our knowledge and expertise give us a powerful voice at the most influential levels of government and business, where we establish animal welfare as a global priority and a local concern. Though the challenge is great, our determination is greater.
Thank you all for your patience, and welcome back to this final session of this report launch. I do understand we do have some journalists online. So if you do need the permission to speak, that is, please raise your virtual hand and I can allow you to speak for you to have a session with Dr. Victor Yamo. We could start in any order, just raise your hand and we will get on with it. Or if you do want to type in your question, kindly do that in the comment sections or the Q&A, and Dr. Yamo will be taking it. So the floor is still open. If anyone does have a question, or if anyone needs a one-on-one session with Dr. Victor Yamo, you can reach out to Ivan Skipkoril, our communications and multimedia. He will be able to arrange something for you. Since at this point I do not see any requests, so we can have that later on for those who want one-on-one interviews, those who want one-on-one sessions. We can do live sessions, virtual sessions, but do reach out to Ivan Skipkoril, our multimedia and communications officer. His email will be in the comments, in the chat box, so kindly watch out for that. And do reach out when you have the need to or the need for. At this point, I would like to say a big thank you to everyone that has been left behind. A big thank you to our presenter, Dr. Victor Yamo. It's always a great session. It's always great having you doing coverage on reports as well as issues around food systems, animal welfare, and how we go about agriculture, that is animal agriculture. Just before we close off, we did receive a question from Matthew from JQuats, who would like to ask what measures and strategies have been put into place to ensure the county government is upholding, or county governments are upholding, animal welfare issues at the grassroots, having in mind the question of AMR, which is a looming phenomenon. Dr. Victor Yamo, I know you had tackled that a bit, but if you do have any additional questions, kindly take that up. And after that, we will play one more video, then close off this launch. Thank you all. Thank you for being with us. Back to you, Dr. Victor Yamo.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, for that question from Matthew. I think my simple answer is that the Constitution provides an elaborate process on what the expectation of, or the rules, the duties of county governments are, and all that is laid out in Schedule 4. Part B, Part A talks about what national government should do. Part B talks about what county government should do. So I think it behoves for us as citizens of these counties to ensure that we hold our leadership accountable to deliver what they need to deliver. National government has done its role in certain things. If you're looking at specifically climate change, in matters relating to climate change, national government has done the national distributed contribution, the NDCs. And as I said, our NDC was done in 2017. So I think it's the responsibility of county governments to find out how they fit into that. In terms of animal welfare, there's a whole elaborate system around animal welfare. We start with the fact that there are policies in place, not necessarily driving animal welfare, but there are mentions in certain policies. The veterinary policy, for instance, sessional paper 2, number 2 or 3 of 2020, has a whole session on animal welfare and what needs to be done. I know currently the national government is trying to ensure that we have a new animal welfare and protection bill, one of the 4 bills that is being pushed by national government through parliament to address the animal welfare issues. You realize that the current piece of legislation, Prevention of Cruelty Act, Cap 360, is a bit outdated. And it doesn't take into consideration the fact that we are now operating from counties. And so the new bill, the Animal Welfare and Protection Bill, will look at that critically because it then creates county animal welfare committees that drive some of these things. In matters relating to to AMR, the reality is that counties are now developing CASICs. National government has already in 2017 developed a national policy for containment of antimicrobial resistance. They did then in 2017, they also did the first national action plan for management and containment and prevention of antimicrobial resistance, which lapsed in 2022. 2023, this year we launched a new AMR, a national action plan that is driving that process. So I think it's again the responsibility of counties to come into this place. Remember that things, medical, health, veterinary, production, are devolved functions. So the leadership should be able to drive that processes. At this level, I would like to commend the 17 or so counties that have then taken up what has been developed nationally and mainstreamed in their county processes. We have what is known as county action plans. It's about 17 or so counties have developed a CASIC, County Antimicrobial Interagency Steering Committees. So it's all counties then needs to determine, and I think it's all about leadership at the sector level, leadership at the county level, leadership and engagement with the governor. In one of the counties that I had the privilege of participating in their launch of their work plan 2023 to 2025, they have even put antimicrobial resistance into the CIDP, the County Integrated Development Plan for the current governor. So I think it's all about engaging at certain levels and then ensuring that county leaderships then take their responsibility and drive that process. The way they do that is if we, the populace and the electorate and the citizens of these counties, be part and parcel of that process, because these engagements are usually driven through public participation. And so you need to drive your county to do what it needs to do in terms of antimicrobial resistance, in terms of agriculture and extension, in terms of veterinary services, in terms of food production, in terms of climate change, because counties have a responsibility to be part of that process. I hope that answers your question, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Victor Yamo. Thank you everyone for attending today's session. We do hope and we do wish to see you next time. Kindly keep engaged, keep interacting with us through social media, through digital platforms, and our website as well. Our contact details can be found on most of our platforms as well as our website. Do interact with us, do spread the message, and do share content around how factory farming is becoming a nuisance or a disaster that is looming. So at this point, we will play one more video, and for those who needed contacts to our media liaisons, kindly watch out for the chat section. Thank you. Have a good day. Have a good rest of your day. Stay blessed and see you next time. Asante sana.
Wale wanyama nilikuwa nao sababu ya kukosa chakula walidhoofika. Ukitafuta mtu wa kununua, anunua ng'ombe mzima wa about 30,000, 40,000 anakupatia chini ya 10,000. Kwa hivyo unashindwa unafanya nini? Wengine walidhoofika wakashindwa na kutembea wakafa, tukapatia umbwa. Jina langu ni James Kituku Kikuvi. Nimezaliwa hapa, niko na umri wa miaka 63. Hapa ni Mutulani Village ambayo ni sehemu moja ya Makueni Sub-County and Makueni County. Kazi ninafanya kwa wakati huu, kitambo nilikuwa ni mwalimu, nikaretire, niko hapa nyumbani. Chakula tunapata kutoka kwa shamba. Shambani ukikosekana chakula inategemea workshop ambayo siku hizi haina kazi. Sasa hao watu ndio nawapatia chakula kutokana na hizo.
Kwa sababu mama akiwa nyumbani ulikuwa nachukua tu kitu cha kuchimba, naenda nachimba viazi, nawekea watoto kwa jiko, chimba mihogo na watoto kwa jiko. Lakini wakati ukame ilikuja, ikawa shambani hakuna kitu, hakuna. Sasa kile kitu cha kuweka kwa jiko ni kutoa kwa soko. Sasa mama wakawa hapo wamegharamika sana. Maisha yameanza kuwa na gharama na vyakula inakuwa sasa huwezi kukula vile ulikuwa unatarajia kukula. Huwezi kulisha familia yako ilikuwa unatarajia kuwalisha kwa sababu tunao sokoni. Ninategemea kilimo cha mimea na pia kilimo cha ufugaji. Hiyo ndio shughuli ambazo tunashughulika nayo.
Sembe kitambo miaka kama 20 ambayo imepita, tulikuwa tunavuna vizuri sana. Vegetables tulikuwa tukipanda nyingi. Hata zilikuwa haziwezi isha. Tulikuwa hata tunalisha mbuzi nazo. Pia nilikuwa ninafunga mbuzi. Nilikuwa na mbuzi kuna wakati nilikuwa na mbuzi kama 40 hivi. Na ng'ombe. Lakini vile iliendelea miaka ilipozidi, hizo nyasi hazipatikani, hasikui vizuri kwa sababu hakuna mvua ya kutosha. Imefika wakati kukauka, ikawa hata maji tunanunua maji ya kunywa, tunanunua maji ya ng'ombe. Tuseme for any domestic use. Tunanunua maji.
Sahi maji tuko na borehole iko karibu. Lakini zamani tulikuwa tunachota kwa kisima. Na hiyo kisima ilikuwa na maji nyingi, lakini vile wakati imeendelea na kupunguza. Hata saa nyingine inakauka kabisa. Si nyingi vile ilikuwa zamani. Kipunguza tunaenda kwa mto. Na sasa mito haina maji. Wakati ukame ulikuja mito imekauka, hata maji ile kwa mito ni kidogo sana. Na kuna wakati mwingine inakauka kabisa, inakuwa huwezi pata maji kwa mto.
Tulikuwa na mpango ya kujenga, hiyo mambo ya kujenga ikasimama. Sababu ile pesa wanapata yote inaenda kwa chakula. Na mahitaji kama kununua nyasi ya ng'ombe. Unaona uangalie kuweka kile kiko hai kikae hai, lakini maendeleo inasimama. Unajua kuna vitu vingine zinakuja, zina affect mvua. Tuseme kama population pressure imechangia. Watu wako wengi, ukitaka kujenga unakata miti na upandi miti. Zamani kulikuwa demand ya supply ya vitu vingine ambayo inatengenezwa kwa viwanda ilikuwa si kubwa sana. Kwa hivyo saa hii ukiona demand vile iko juu ya vitu kama sisi zinatengenezwa kwa viwanda, nao pia viwanda zinaongezea. Na hiyo kuongezea sinaharibu ile carbon inatoka kwa viwanda, pia ikipanda juu inaharibu anga.
Kwa hivyo kile naweza kuambia waangalie, waweke mikakati ambayo mikakati inaweza kusaidia vitu ambazo zinatoa moshi. Viwanda zile ambazo zinatoa moshi zisiwe zinaweza kutoa moshi ya kuharibu mazingira. Kuweka mikakati kuhusu huu ukulima wa ufugaji. Tusitumie sana chemicals katika ufugaji wetu, na pia vyakula ambazo tunapatia hawa wanyama wetu tutumie zile ambazo tunaweza kutoa kwa mashamba yetu. Tusitumie zile chemicals ambazo zinaweza kudhuru hata pia afya zetu.
If there are no measures taken to stop it, then tutakuwa tunaletewa chakula kutoka nje. Manake hatutakuwa able kujitafutia chakula ambayo inatutosheleza. Sababu bila maji, bila mvua, chakula hatuwezi tukalima. Kwa hivyo itakuwa itoke nje. Na kwa watu wale wazee kama mimi, itakuwa wanawawa na stress. Utaona familia ikianza kutawanyika, naye mzee anapanda damu, unaenda.